Welcome back, everyone, to this episode of We Got Your Six. I'm Marge Machi.
And I'm Katrina Jenkins.
And we're really excited to bring you a guest, or that's going to be a guest here. And he is Stewart McCarthy, Major Stewart McCarthy, from all the way across the globe, has come to share with us his thoughts about mefloquine, and we're going to get to know him and what he's been up to. So, Stewart, I'm just going to let you jump in and introduce yourself. And firstly, thank you so much for joining us here. It's morning over there and it's evening here. So, I mean, it's already Sunday there, right? So that's
yeah, it's Sunday here. It's late morning Sunday. So, great to talk to you, Marge and Katrina. I know we've been trying to organise this for a little while, and your timing's great because there's a lot of things that are happening here in Australia that I know you'll be interested in, and the people that watch your channel are going to be very interested to hear. I think I guess the overall message is that this is really a global fight now, and we talk to each other in Canada and the US, in UK, a whole bunch of other countries. So your timing's really good. To introduce myself, I joined the Australian Army in 1989. I had a very long career in the Army. I spent 28 years. I did during, I guess, the second half of that career, when things really started to ramp up. From around September 11 onwards, when things got really busy. I did a number of deployments. My first deployment was to Papua New Guinea. It was an unarmed peacekeeping deployment. In that deployment, I was involved in one of the drug trials that we can talk about later on, involving tafenoquine, a very similar drug to mefloquine. My next deployment was to UN peacekeeping mission in Ethiopia and Eritrea over in Africa. And just a quick aside there, I had a lot to do with the Canadian contingent over there, which I've since discovered some of those guys were taking mefloquine over there, as I was. And then, that story that you guys already know about the long-term, effects that these drugs can have. I was experiencing those. I had a lot of problems over the years. I had no idea what they were all about. I could never quite put my finger on those, but I continued to push myself and stayed in the Army for quite some years. I kept doing a lot of deployments. I went to big disaster relief mission in 2005. That was after the big tsunami that hit the ocean. Then I went to Iraq in 2006. And then I went to, I did 2 deployments to Afghanistan. That was in 2011, and then in 2013 when we were winding down our operations in Afghanistan. So that takes me to 2013. And then, in the year or so following that, I had another downward turn, and went to see my doctors again, and they really wanted to help, and they said to me, look, go take a few days off. We know you're having a really tough time, but during that few days, have a think about, just go over your history, and then, when you come back, we'll go over everything. We'll try and figure out what's been going on. And that was in 2014, right? So then, during that few days, I looked at everything. I was talking to my friends about, what some of the things that, might have possibly happened in my deployments. I went right back and looked at all of my patrol reports that I still had. I looked at photos, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. But my wife at the time, she actually worked in the pharmaceutical industry. She used to work on clinical trials, and she said to me, look, have a look at what medications you were taking. And then one of the ones I came up with was mefloquine. And then I started looking into that. I saw, the published research that had been mounting up. I saw some of the papers written by Dr. Nevin, who you know well. And that's when I had my big light bulb moment.
Right.
It all started to make sense. It didn't answer everything, but it answered a lot. And that's when I started digging into not just my issues, but I started asking the question, why is it that we have so many, former soldiers, so many veterans who are really struggling with not just PTSD, but PTSD and, mental health problems more generally, and they're not getting better. Why are they not
Exactly.
getting better? And then, so I was still in the army at that time. I was having a tough time myself, but I thought, well, what can I do? I'm not going to just sit here and on my own and look after myself. That's not my instinct. So, I started writing things down. I started, going to people in the army, some of the medical people in the army, and I just got stonewalled. And this is something that you know very well, so you know that story.
Yes.
And about that time, just by coincidence, there was a Senate inquiry in Australia to look into mental health in the Defence Force, and what's going on and what needs to be done to improve the situation. So I actually wrote a submission to that. That was in 2015. It focused largely on mefloquine, but some of the broader mental health issues. I started asking questions. Why do we have all these people going into the mental health system, getting all of these treatments that are not working? Why do we have so many veterans who are ending their own lives? So that was where I started to come out publicly, because as you know, these inquiries are held publicly. My submission was public. The media picked up on that, and there was there was a burst of media coverage. Journalists were starting to report, who's this army officer, coming out and saying all these critical things about the military. And that was, I got labelled a whistleblower, and there's a whole story there. And I ended up basically having this toe-to-toe argument with the Vice Chief of the Defence, all through the media. I said things about him in the Senate inquiry that he didn't like. He responded with media releases. There was front-page stuff. So really, for the last 5 years since then, I've been a public advocate for veterans affected by these things. I've been doing some positive work in trying to put together a package of the right medical care, so we can help these people. But then along the way, I've started talking to all of these other advocates, in the veterans community, in the mental health community, etc. But one part of that though is very early on, right from back in 2015, I started talking to people internationally. I started talking to Dr. Nevin. I started talking to people in the UK, and one of those people was John Dow, who you know really well now. And one of the early conversations I had with John was, I'd heard about the Somalia inquiry, and John had made some comments about that online, and I said, hey, what's the story there, John? What happened there? And I saw all these awful things in the news all these years ago. What's the story? And he started to tell me that story, and and I think that was not long before he reached out to you. He said, oh look, I'm going to go and talk to Matthew. So yeah, so that's my story. I know there's a lot of things you'll want to ask me about, royal commissions and things like that, but that's pretty much my story and where I am now today, and how I started talking to you guys over there in Canada.
Well, I mean, I've followed you now since you've come out and advocated, and you're one powerful advocate. You can't say mefloquine or tafenoquine in any statement in the global world that doesn't have your name pop up right next to it, Stuart. So, I mean, we just thank you for everything you do, because a win over there is a win here, and back and forth. That's the way I feel. I was kind of curious, and you sort of answered that, but I was kind of curious that you, living in Australia, picked up on the Somalia inquiry, and I was just wondering what your take was on that when you heard it. I was going to ask you how, but obviously you found out through John Dow, basically, right?
Well, actually, it goes back. It goes back a lot further than that.
Oh, okay.
And oh yeah, and it's a really good question. You know, the Somalia deployment happened in the early 90s, as you know. That was very early in my career. You know, the Somalia situation, the whole international response to Somalia, it was global news. You know, Australia sent a contingent to Somalia, very similar size to the Canadian contingent. You know, I had a number of my friends deployed over there. Um, and so, you know, a couple of years, and you know the Canadian side of the story, obviously. You know, a couple of years after that military deployment went down, you know, the big controversy involving Clayton and the Canadian Airborne Regiment, you know, it splashed across the front page of
Oh,
the news
yes.
globally. You know, it's all that stuff. And you know, my first reaction, I look at those horrible people, you know, over there on a UN mission doing all these horrible things. You know, I was as horrified as the next person.
So did
And
you
but
play?
to give you another example of how embedded that one-sided story was. Um, at the time, and or shortly after the Somalia inquiry was happening, I was on a promotion course. I was on a promotion course for captain, which is, you know, mid-90s, and you know, we had a military lawyer come in. He was an expert in, you know, operations law, international law, and he gave us a lecture on, you know, the laws of armed conflict, and his example of what can go wrong if you don't have, you know, the right training and the right leadership and all the rest of it was, you know, look at what happens. Look at the Somalia inquiry. Look at this guy Clayton Maxey, and you know, look at what he did. And I, you know, that's the story that I believe for a long time. You know, that we're talking, you know, mid 90s. I took that on, and you know, I read up on this stuff, and you know, I read the Somalia inquiry report. You know, and oh, awful, horrible. These horrible soldiers, these horrible officers who let all these horrible things happen. And so for, you know, good, how long is that? You know, 20 years. You know, that was my take, right? But then, so we come, you know, back to 2015. I was talking to John, and I discovered John mentioned me. Look, I was in the Canadian Airborne Regiment, and I thought, wow, you know, what happened? And he was right there. You know, he was in the bunker. John was in the bunker. He saw exactly what happened. But then and I said, hey, you know, how could Clayton do these things? And he said to me, he said, Stuart, you know, we were on a mefloquine drug trial. We were all messed up. We were all messed up.
Yep.
And you know that story. You've spoken to all of those guys now. You know, you've spoken a lot to John. You've spoken to Dave Boner. And but even then, you know, I was skeptical. You know, it took John some time to say, hey, Stuart, you know, there's a lot more to this, and it hasn't come out. You know, they shut down that quarry at the point that they were going to start asking those about that drug. You know, so what do we take from that? You know, there's still a lot of people who are really skeptical. I know one thing that I admire you for in your advocacy. And I've seen a lot of your interviews, and a lot of your critics and naysayers have been saying, "Oh, look, here's Marge Matchy. She's trying to get Clayton exonerated for Woody," and that's not you at all. You know, you've been really clear about, you know, the reasons for you speaking out. It's to get people the right help. You know, it's Clayton's done what he's done. He's paid a high price for that. You know, he's in a bad way, and he can't tell his story because he's so unwell. You know, so I really admire you for that. It's hard, you know. You were a lone voice there for a long time, and you really got put through. I mean, a lot of the stuff I've been put through for 5 years, you've been put through for 25 years. You know, so. But you know, I guess, you know, what do we take from that? You know, we've got to keep getting our story out there, and it's tough. You know, I know there's a lot of that whole scapegoating exercise that was done, you know, by the naysayers in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
That was very, very effective, and it was very effective within that group soldiers, and
Absolutely.
even from the Canadian Airborne Regiment. You talk to a lot of those guys even now. It's all Clayton's fault. It's all Clayton's fault. And trying to bring those guys together and say, no, there's more to it than that. I know yourself and John and the others have been saying, no, we need to go back and we need to reopen that Somalia inquiry. Even within that group, that's hard because they don't want to go through all that stuff again. They don't want to open that can of worms again. But that's got to be done.
It has to be, and I've been saying it forever. It's the only way to take it right back, let it run its natural course, let the truth be told. It's the only way. And it explains how things went wrong. It will explain about a drug trial that wasn't followed properly. It will explain all that. So.
Yeah.
What I find happening is that I'm running into a lot of people that haven't even heard, right? Like, so it's like I talked to a lot of the veterans that were young when they went to Afghanistan, and I'm talking to veterans that haven't even heard about like that incident, and then explain. So it's like explaining the incident, what the media thinks happened, and then or how the media explains it, and then explaining like everything about it and why we need to reopen it, right? So it's like it's hard to be like, okay, this is why we need the inquiry when people don't even know, why we need it. So it's like a giant history lesson.
Well, let's look at it this way. All these years later, you look at the inquiry into what happened with Lionel Desmond. 20 years, 25 years after the Somalia inquiry, this stuff's still going on. These awful things are still happening. Again, does mefloquine answer everything? No, it doesn't, but it's a big part of the story. And had that Somalia inquiry taken its full course, had these problems been properly dealt with, the question I have is, would Lionel Desmond even have been given mefloquine? And even if he had, perhaps he would have got the right care when he came back home, and perhaps these awful things might not keep happening. So it's really.
I so agree with that. If they would have just followed the inquiry, it should have, in all the right circumstances, stop that drug from being used at that point on. Instead, no, right? So, yeah, I think it's been a long time. I don't even know what to say about that other than we just have to keep being strong and global and loud, and we'll finally one day get that inquiry reopened.
Yeah, definitely.
So while we're on the topic of inquiries, this has piqued my interest for some time now, and I feel like we need this, and I think it might be in the works, but if not, I'm looking towards that. I've been reading a lot of reports coming out of Australia, and from following you, that there's a Royal Commission of Inquiries happening or being looked at as a possibility in Australia, and I know you're part of that. So I was wondering if you could allude to that a little for us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is a huge story. So where to begin? I guess just to touch a little bit of background first, right? So there's a really big parallel between what happened in Canada and Somalia all those years ago and what happened in Australia. One of the reasons. So we probably want to. We'll come back to that, but just a little bit of background so you understand. So during the period, 1999 to 2002, and I kind of touched on some of this in my intro, there are a series of really big drug trials involving the Australian Defence Force. Started in Bougainville, but then in East Timor in 99, right through the next 2 or 3 years. And we're talking thousands of troops. So these were big undertakings. If you look at just the numbers of people who were given tafenoquine and mefloquine, it's just short of 3,000 people. Right? And then if you include the comparator drugs as part of the studies and how they were done, we're talking, well over 4,000 people. These are huge.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and we will come back and talk about that a little bit more. But there's a lot of unanswered questions from those, and and myself and a number of other people have been asking for those. And I personally began asking those questions, as I was saying before, in 2015, during a Senate. And there have been a number of inquiries that have all been kind of looking at this broader issue of, veterans, veterans' mental health, medical care in the Defence Force, suicides, and wrapped up in all this has been these drugs, and the harm that's been done by these drugs, and the lack of care,
Right.
So personally, what I have been doing in this group of affected veterans and families that's been building and building and building very, very broadly, we've been pushing for two things. The first thing is we want to get the right care. We want to get the right medical care. We want to get the right family support. You guys both know what that's all about. But then the other part of this, and again, we kind of touched on it, talking about the Somalia inquiry, it's really, really important that we have proper accountability for what was done, because if we don't, then these things are going to keep happening again and again and again. Now, through all of these Senate inquiries and internal defence inquiries, there've been some positive things that have come out of those. I guess one of the most positive things is a lot of this stuff now is on the public record, so you can look that stuff up. So we had a Senate inquiry in 2018, which looked specifically into the drugs, the anti-malaria drugs, mefloquine and tafenoquine. They looked at the drug trials that we were involved in. And that was a huge effort by all of the different people in our group, by the veterans themselves, by the families, writing submissions, going and testifying, and the stories that they told. I mean, they were heartbreaking. We had families who'd lost their sons and daughters, coming out and speaking publicly about what had happened. Now that's horrible. That's really hard to do, but it's so important. And I'm so proud of what they all did. Now we, as a group, were a bit sceptical as to what the findings would be from that inquiry. Again, this is a game that you understand really well. We had the military doctors came out and snowed everything. We had the pharmaceutical industry people came out and snowed it. And what we took away from that is that some of the weaknesses of inquiries. When a Senate committee does an inquiry like this, the senators don't have the expertise. They can have all the good intentions in the world, but they don't know. They can't even pronounce the names of these drugs, right? They're not doctors, and so to their credit, when they published the report of this inquiry, there was a disclaimer at the front. It said, look, we don't have this committee doesn't have the expertise in medical, so we can't make findings as to what damage has been done by this drug. It was very disappointing that they didn't come out with really hard-hitting recommendations. But as I said, that stuff's on public record, so that's a good start point, right? But when you look at the weaknesses of these type of inquiries, they don't have the right expertise, and really importantly, they don't have the right powers, right? So a Senate inquiry, they can't go and seize evidence in the Defence Department, in the Veterans Affairs Department. They can invite witnesses to come and testify, but they can't compel them to testify. And even the ones who do come along from those departments, they're not, you're not under oath, so and you're not really cross-examined, right? So a lot of these people, as they came along and they just lied. They lied, and we picked their lies, but we, went back to, the officials running that inquiry. So look, these people are just lying to you, and gave them the evidence, which people lied. But again, there's positives that come out of this experience, because to give you one example of this, one of the individuals who testified to that inquiry he was one of the officers, one of the scientists. He was a uniformed guy, a uniformed army officer. He worked for Army Malaria Institute during his drug trials. He then went on, soon after he left the army, several years later, and he actually worked as a consultant for the pharmaceutical. And he was, as a consultant, he was working for, one of the pharmaceutical companies that was using the information they gathered from these drug trials to try and get tafenoquine registered, on the market. But he made some pretty serious blunders in his testimony. He was one of these very arrogant, very overconfident guys, and he gave a lot away. And one of the things he gave away was that the company that he was consulting for, they were in a lot of financial problems. A lot of financial distress. They were continuing to try and get money from the US military to get this drug onto the market. And we picked up a lot of really, really good information from his testimony alone. So, that was a big learning experience for us. A lot of disappointment. We've had disappointments with these inquiries over a period of time, but then what I've learned, and what a lot of us have learned along the way is, we need to really get to the bottom, not just of these drug trials, not just of, mental health, not just suicides. We need to get to the bottom of the whole big suite of how veterans, how military people are treated and mistreated. We need to expose a lot of the cover-ups. Now, a lot of those things have been done in isolation. We've had a lot of good people doing a lot of work, pushing their agenda. A lot of people pushing the PTSD agenda, which is really important. A lot of people pushing the veteran suicide agenda. There's been my group. We've been pushing this drug trial thing. And around about the time, so back in 2015, that first inquiry that I was involved in that I mentioned, I said, hey, we need to have a Royal Commission. A lot of other people have been saying, oh, look, we need to have a Royal Commission. So there's been this push now for a number of years towards having a Royal Commission, whether it be into suicides, whether it be into veterans' mental health, or whatever that might be. Now, so what do we mean? What are we actually talking about? What is a Royal Commission of Inquiry compared to what a Senate inquiry is? Well, what a Royal Commission does is it has, it's a very, very powerful, it's really the highest level of inquiry that you can have in Australia. What happens is that the Prime Minister will go to the Governor-General, the Governor-General will say, yeah, we need a Royal Commission. The government will appoint a commissioner who has the right expertise in that area to actually inquire into these things. And the powers that this commission has are some of those things that I touched upon. They can go and seize evidence. They can go to the Department of Defence, they can go to the Veterans Affairs Department, they can even go to the pharmaceutical companies, or at least the ones here in Australia, and they can walk in there with basically the same powers that the police have to go and seize documentary evidence dating right back all those years. They can bring that in, they can look at they can piece everything together, who said what, who ordered or who approved things. They can expose a lot of these cover-ups, and a commission comes with a really strong investigative team, very experienced lawyers, very experienced investigators. And from our perspective, the people who are able to go and testify to a Royal Commission, they get a lot of support and a lot of protection. I spoke before about how hard it is, when you're going to testify to these inquiries. If you go to a Senate inquiry, you're pretty much on your own. You need to write a submission yourself. You turn up, on your own. I mean, we helped each other out, which was great. Right. with a Royal Commission, though, you get a lot of support, you get a lot of protection too. So, for example, if you try to intimidate or threaten a witness, a Royal Commission inquiry, well, that's a criminal offence. You can be sent to jail for that stuff. And there's also a lot of social support. So if you look at some of the other Royal Commissions that we've had in Australia very recently, one of the really big ones was an inquiry into sex abuse by institutions, that went back decades. And one of the organisations that was examined under that inquiry was the Department of Defence. And some of the abuse that was going on, dating right back to the 1970s, it was really put under very, very serious scrutiny, to such an extent that the same guy, and this is a funny little irony here, the same Vice Chief of the Defence Force that I was having that toe-to-toe with back in 2015, he was the guy that the Defence Force rolled out to that Royal Commission, go and testify about all these awful things. He had to deliver an apology for institutional sex abuse that had occurred in the Department of Defence, in the Defence Force, starting right back to the 1970s.
Yeah.
And you can watch his video. That's all public. And this is another thing about these inquiries is, from our perspective, if you're a family, you've lost your loved one, you have the option of, when you go and testify, that can be a closed hearing. So you don't have to have your name all through the media. You have that option.
That's nice.
Of getting that support, but still getting all that evidence properly scrutinised. But if you're a public official, if you're one of these doctors who are involved in these drug trials, if you're one of these very senior Defence Force officers who've been involved in covering up suicides, well, those hearings are public, right? And the media covers these things, as the documentary evidence is tabled in these inquiries. That's made public, and so there's public accountability here. And I guess the final thing, touch on when it comes to the powers of a Royal Commission is they have powers in some cases to even prosecute crimes. Royal Commission's previously been given the power to do that. But even when they're not given that power, within the inquiry itself, they can refer evidence of crimes to the police and the Department of Public Prosecution. So even as that Royal Commission continues its work, there can be criminal prosecution going on. Right? This is serious stuff. Now we all know about a lot of that, systematic abuse, all of the crimes. We know where to look, but we just can't get that. That information is locked away, in files in the Department of Defence. But the moment that we get a Royal Commission underway, they can go and seize that evidence. We can work with their investigators, and that's when that serious public accountability kicks. So that's what a Royal Commission does. So the next question is how do we get there? So over the last few years, with the veterans community have been all kind of working away from all these different angles, try and get a Royal Commission. And the response to that from the government and from these departments has just been to stonewall. And because we haven't been working as a really well-organised team, that's been quite easy for them to do. They've said, oh no, we'll make that problem go away by having another Senate inquiry, or they've targeted the advocates, the outspoken advocates. They've sort of targeted and them and tried to discredit them. I've been put through that. I know you've been put through that. What that's like. They've been pretty effective in stonewalling and stuff. That's okay. We learn from that, and we keep building our team. We keep talking to each other, and we keep figuring out what the next step is.
Mhm.
So over the last 12 months, the push for a Royal Commission specifically into suicide has really, really kicked into gear.
Good.
And what's happened is that a group of mothers who's lost their sons to suicide, either while they were serving in the Defence Force or after they've left, and then didn't get the right help that they needed from the Veterans Affairs Department. One of those mothers in particular, name's Julianne Finney, she started a petition almost 12 months ago now, calling for a Royal Commission specifically into veterans. And one of the real positives from that is very early on, she got a lot of traction in the mainstream media, and we're talking about the Murdoch media. So the major Murdoch tabloid newspapers actually run a campaign.
Wow.
They called it, Save Our Heroes. And the campaign run by these mothers was called, Vets We Forget. And they did, front page stuff, all through the newspapers. They did a lot of television interviews. They told their stories. A lot of other families come out and told their stories. And so that petition, which they ran, which was being backed by these mainstream media outlets, it got almost, as of yesterday, I think it was 284,000 signatures. Okay, so almost 300,000 signatures.
Wow.
That was this big, big campaign. And then as that campaign ramped up, late last year, around November, just, to give you one example, on Remembrance Day, okay, so 11th of November, Armistice Day, there were protest is not the right word, because there were a series of events on Remembrance Day where these mothers and friends and family members came out, and they said, look, we've got this petition. We need this Royal Commission of Inquiry. There's a lot of media. And then they also went to Canberra. They went to the national capital. They went to Parliament House. They met because of this very effective campaign that got them in the door. It got them in the door to meet the Prime Minister, got them in the door to meet the right ministers. And they met politicians from right across the spectrum. And again, this was front page stuff. And they met with the Prime Minister, and as a result of that, the Prime Minister said, okay, well, I'm going to look at this. I'm going to give serious thought into this Royal Commission. I'm going to go away over the Christmas break. I'm going to come back, and I'll give you a response. Sir, you've come to me with this petition. I'm going to come back. I'm not going to commit now. I'm going to give some thought, come back, and I'll give you an answer. And this is where it gets interesting as well. This is where the politics come in, right? So over the Christmas holidays, there's some really interesting politics happening. So the Prime Minister went away on holiday, and as you know, because you and I have been speaking about this a little bit as well, we've had a really bad year this year, with natural disasters. We've had catastrophic bushfires, forest fires right up and down, and so there was a national outcry. People were saying, look, why are the state governments, why are volunteers responding to this big natural disaster when the Prime Minister is nowhere to be seen? And it turns out that the Prime Minister, right in the middle of all this, he was on holidays in Hawaii.
Yeah.
And that got national media coverage. It also got international media coverage. All this stuff was happening, and the thing with the Australian Prime Minister at the moment, because of that, but also prior to that, he has this reputation. I mean, he's got this nickname, Scotty from marketing. He's got this marketing background, and so a lot of times when he responds to a political problem, he's been asked to step in and fix. He has this reputation of coming back in with this marketing. Really doesn't get to the bottom of what he's being asked to do. Now, why do I say that? Well, this is what brings us to how he responded to this campaign. You know, he for a few weeks he got wrapped up in a lot of that, you know, pretty adverse coverage about where he was and what he did to respond to that big natural disaster. So that took a lot of the political heat, you know, for the first week or so after the, you know, Parliament. There's a lot of criticism in the media and so on. And then, so this campaign kicked up another gear. You know, these mothers made another trip down to Canberra. And at the same time, there was also a coronial for one of these suicides. So, you know, that campaign for this Royal Commission picked up a gear, and there was a lot of media coverage on one of those coronial inquiries. Now, the next day, the day after that news of that coronial inquiry, the Prime Minister came out with his big response to the Royal Commission. And as we expected, it was half-baked, right? So there was a big media splash. The same media outlets that had been supporting this campaign had been tipped off that the Prime Minister is going to come back with his big response. So this big response comes out from the Prime Minister, right? The Prime Minister is going to have not a Royal Commission, but it's going to be a rolling Royal Commission. It's going to have the powers of a Royal Commission. It's not going to be a Royal Commission, but it's going to have the powers of a Royal Commission. Very quickly, we looked at some of the information that he presented back to these mums, and it was a 2-page fact sheet, right? Said, oh, look, it's not going to be a Royal Commission, but what we're going to do is we're not going to have public inquiries where we're going to have, you know, each time there's a suicide, we'll have another inquiry. It'll be behind closed doors. We'll look at that death, and then, you know, when that individual inquiry is done, there'll be another report. That report will come back to my department, and it'll sit there.
The stone on it.
It was so it was pretty half-baked, but it because we have been working together as a on a bigger, broader team for some time. We've got lawyers who can look at this stuff. We've got people who are very, very experienced in the processes of, you know, how the Veterans Affairs Department works or doesn't work. We figured out very quickly that the people who had advised the Prime Minister on this response were the same departments who we've been asking to come under scrutiny in this Royal Commission. So we figured that out very quickly. And so what happened, this was only this week just gone by, right? So in fact, sorry, it was 10 days ago, so almost 2 weeks ago. Now, the Prime Minister came out, did this big media splash. We're going to have this rolling Royal Commission. You know, he did another trip up to Townsville, which is one of our big garrison towns, to make an announcement there and have a meeting with some of his handpicked, you know, veterans. And we'll come back to that because that's a part of the story too. So remind me about the Prime Minister going to Townsville, because that's a really fun. But so he made all these big announcements going back just 10 days ago now. And our veterans community, some of the mums have been running this campaign, some of the lawyers that advise us, we picked this apart. There was a lot to pick apart because there was 2 fact sheets. And one of the things we figured out very quickly, hey, there's no legislation for this thing.
Oh.
So even to get this, what he was calling this rolling Royal Commission, he's got to pass new legislation. He's got to get this new legislation through Parliament. So there's so many holes in this thing. But to their credit, you know, these mums that have been running this campaign, they picked up on this. So they did another trip back to Canberra. They went back there this week, just gone by, and they called him out. They called out the Prime Minister and they said, hey, you know, hey, thanks for this thing that you just announced, but, you know, it doesn't do what we need. You know, it doesn't. It's not going to look into these criminal misconduct. It's not going to have public inquiry. You know, it's not going to look at all of the systematic problems. that would need to be. And hey, by the way, where's the legislation? And the other interesting part of that is when they went back to the national capital. They went back to meet the Prime Minister. So within a week of him making this big announcement, they hit the call straight back into his court. They called his bluff. And they did that at the steps of Parliament House. They did that at a media conference. They did that with one of the senators who's very, very vocal in her support for the veterans community. And when she needs to be, she's very, very critical of the government on these things. And she put the ball right back into the court of the Prime Minister. So that's kind of all unfolded just in this last week. And once again, the Prime Minister's said, oh my God, I need to get back to you guys. He had that meeting with the mums again, and he said, okay, I've still got some more homework to do. So there's this, and I'll have to come back to you again. He committed to them apparently to get back to them again in another 5 days. All right, so there's this next mad scramble in the Prime Minister's office now to kind of, I don't know, draft out legislation, come up with, who knows? But we're ready for that. Again, he'll come back and give that information back to those mothers and as to what this response actually is. But in the meantime, those mothers and the broader veterans community are very, very persistent. And in the meantime, we've been building our team. We've got a lot of really strong voices that haven't come out of the woodwork yet, who are now prepared to come out and do media stuff, and are now prepared to go and have those meetings, in the national capital. And the good thing now is, because of all of that team building that we've been done, a lot of those naysayers that have previously tried to argue against this Royal Commission, they're falling by the wayside now. They're less vocal in the media, and our team is becoming more confident and stronger. And so, where will we go from here? I think, regardless of what the Prime Minister does come back with in the next week or so, you'll see more voices coming out in the media, advocating very publicly for this Royal Commission. And so again, if we do need to call the Prime Minister's bluff, it's not just going to be these mums, it's going to be a whole lot of other voices. And the other positive about this is that the media have learned from this too. They've seen when the Prime Minister makes some big splash, some big announcement, hey, maybe they need to question this a bit more. Maybe they need to come and ask some of us out here in the veterans advocacy world what this actually means. So we're in a pretty good place now, and we can sustain this. We can sustain this campaign for quite a long period of time if we need to.
That's so important.
Yeah, it's really, really important. So, and I haven't forgotten. I'm proud of myself. I haven't forgotten this part. The township meeting is really, a really big part of this, and I think you'll enjoy this. Going back a couple of years, we actually were tipped off that the previous one, Malcolm Turnbull, was going to attend a public forum. This was in a lead up to a by-election, right? So there's all this politics to get, these federal candidates for federal parliament elected. And so, the opposition leader and the Prime Minister at that stage were going out, doing all these public forums, lots of media, things like that. We got tipped off he was coming to one of these meetings, and there was going to be media there. And this was not far from where I live. It was only an hour or so drive. So a group of us got together and we turned up. We weren't invited, or in fact we were invited. It was the one of the candidates for this election. Hey, we want to do some good veteran stuff, and you guys come along. Can we come along? Oh yeah, and we came along. We came along with medals and stuff, and we we videotaped the whole thing ourselves. We met the Prime Minister and we said, hey, we need a Royal Commission into these drug trials. I personally gave him a brief. We videotaped that. We gave that to the media. So that was a really, Prime Minister didn't get back to us, but hey, that's on record. That the information I gave him is on record. What we said to him is on record. His response to us was on record. So that's there. Now, politics in Australia is really bad these days. We've had Prime Minister after Prime Minister. They get knifed in the back by their own party. So you kind of have to check your watch to figure out who's actually the Prime Minister. Yeah. But that Prime Minister, he's retired from politics now. So we have another Prime Minister. We've had another election. So anyway, we got tipped off. I mean, it's almost the network that we have now is so strong that it's almost like we know where the Prime Minister is going to be for these meetings almost before he does.
Wow.
So we got another tip off. Somebody from Canberra actually tipped us off. And in fact, they didn't even tip me off. They tipped off some of the veterans in our group, in our sort of mefloquine and tafenoquine group, that, hey, Prime Minister's going to be up in Townsville, tomorrow he's going to be doing a big media event, on the back of his big announcement about this Royal Commission or his bowling Royal Commission thing. Okay? So our guy said, hey, great, we're going to turn up to that too. So they did pretty much the same thing that we did a couple of years ago. They turned up, they'd done all their homework, they had information to give to him. They had the ability to record what they said and what the Prime Minister responded back with. And again, to the Prime Minister's credit, he sat down with them for a good 10 minutes. He listened to what they had to say, and they said, look, this is what was done to us. There's all these questions that need to be answered, and we need a proper inquiry into this stuff. And, he was put on the spot, but he nodded, the Prime Minister nodded to them. Okay, yes. And then they followed up.
And again, that's on record.
To him, this was last week. They wrote to him and they said, hey, we need this inquiry. Let's, where do we go? And so this all happened in parallel, at the same time that the mothers went back to Parliament House and hit the ball back into the Prime Minister's court over this Royal Commission. People in Townsville did the same thing, face to face with a Prime Minister at the other end of the country. So it worked out very, very well. We don't know what the Prime Minister will come back with. But again, my understanding is that these mothers, when they met with the Prime Minister, said, hey, this mefloquine stuff, this tafenoquine stuff, this needs to be part of this Royal Commission. So we've been coming at him from all these angles. And that's a result of this team building, this networking, getting together. And that's hard, when you've got all these different groups trying to push their own little part of the problem, you're only going to get so far.
Right.
So we figured out we need to work, we need to talk to each other, we need to work as a team, we need to network, we need to tell our story to the media in such a way that it backs up the story that these other people are telling. But we all need to converge on this same objective. Mm-hmm. And
which
so
that's
what
we're doing right now, right?
That's where we are now, So that's where
we really do have like a global team, right? Like you can tell, so I'm happy that like everybody in Australia is starting to come together, and then I noticed when you were describing, the moms were, in one place and the other advocates and veterans were in another place. It kind of reminded me of what we're trying to do over here. And then even with this show, right? Because it's we have Canada and Australia coming together, right? Which is pretty amazing. One thing I'm really curious about, you did mention before, was that there's parallels between what's happening in Australia and what's happening in Canada. So what can what can we as Canadians learn from what's going on in Australia, because we're over here trying to do the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I know we've been talking for a long time now, so I'll try and keep this pretty brief, but it's a really, really good question. Even before we get to where we are now, Australia and Canada are very similar countries. You know, our defence forces are very similar. We've got a similar population. You know, the size of our countries and our defence forces are very similar. And as I said before, you know, I've worked with Canadian military on and off over the years, and we kind of get each other. You know,
Mm-hmm.
even with these drug trials, that we went through, there's a really big parallel. So the Canadian Airborne Regiment, you know, there was 1,000 roughly of those people back in Somalia were put through a methadone drug trial. You know, 10 years later, as I was saying, you know, we had thousands of us put through a drug trial, and that's where the tafenoquine story really started. And there was a lot of really bad things happened during and following those drug trials. That story hasn't really come out yet. So our Somalia inquiry hasn't really come out yet, but I think if we do have our Royal Commission, that's going to be where our equivalent to the Somalia inquiry. Yeah. And that kind of explains why our government has been pushing back. They know that. Yeah. But as far as where we are today, I mean, there's a lot of parallels there too, you know, and the advocacy that we've been trying to do. So I saw the interview you did with Stefan Beardwood the other day, and he kind of spoke about, you know, the advocacy that's being done there and how it needs to be structured and organised. I know the work that you two and some of the other spouses have been doing, even within your own groups. That's really, really important. You know, you know, getting the spouses to share their stories. You know, what you've been put through is awful, and it's hard. It's hard to talk about. Mm-hmm. And that's something that we can learn. I think we can learn in Australia from what Canada. We do have our spouses do talk to each other, but it's not, from what I've seen at least, it's not as well organised. You know, and I know you're both in our group, and you know, possibly you know, we could see the Australian partners and spouses kind of follow your lead in. Mm-hmm. But then politically, I know the advocacy, you know, capital A that you've been doing, Marge, and people like John have been doing, turning up to your own parliamentary inquiries. I know you guys have learned a lot from that. You've had a lot on the public record. I think what, and I know there's the big mass tort happening that John's been involved with, and I know, and that took a huge amount of work too. You know, those town hall meetings that happened right across Canada to get that word out and get people to sign up to be part of the mass tort. Even before we get to the court action, there's a real benefit to that. You know, when you have people coming together in town hall meetings, and you get people like John just speaking up. You know, when you get people like you know, that legal team speaking up, it brings people together. You know, it brings people out of the woodwork. They know they're in a place where they can, when they're, I mean, the big problem we all have, right, because of the harmful effects of these drugs is very, very isolated. For a lot of us, for a long time, we're on our own. You know, so even bringing people together, even if those people are not doing media or going and seeing their legal representatives, just coming together and being part of that team. That's a very powerful thing for everyone.
I always say there's power in numbers,
yeah.
right?
Oh yeah. And I guess to wrap it up, the democracy has problems, right? Politics is a problem, but it can work. Democracy can actually work. And that's, I guess that's my big message for you guys, given that we're very similar countries with very similar political systems. It's go and talk to your member of parliament. You know, it's hard. You know, they won't want to talk to you initially, but be persistent. You know, go and talk to them. You know, people lie, but you need to be persistent. Once these politicians know that they have people in their riding, you know, in their constituency who are affected by this stuff, they know that they're going to be held accountable. If they keep stonewalling, and there are people in their constituency who can't get the help they need, there's going to be consequences for them politically because there are people in their constituency who are going to speak out. That's a very, very powerful thing. And then when that's done right across the country, you know, those politicians go back to Ottawa, just as they go back to Canberra, and they talk to each other and they say, hey, I've got these people that are coming to talk to me in my constituency who are demanding that this stuff get done, you know. And that's how democracy works, you know, and that can work. It's hard, but it can work. And we've got to make that. We've got to make that work.
Absolutely.
I agree.
It can work. So yeah, we are now. I think we're in a very strong place. We can sustain this. You know, we can keep working, not just in each country, but we can keep working together globally and make our democracy.
Well, I have to say that's one of the reasons we started doing this talk show is because you know as well as I do, you've been interviewed how many times and so have I, and it's gone the next day. So we need something, like you said, that's sustainable and keeps the momentum, right? And keeps the awareness flowing.
And even more so, we need to spread the message of hope, right?
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's great to get the information out there, but we always, like on this show, you know, always near the end, and then I'm like, okay, message of hope. So what's your biggest message of hope? Like, I have a million other questions, but
well, we have to have Stuart back. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, there's
I'll come back.
So
you won't shut me up now. Yeah. Well, I think what I was saying just before. I mean, I personally am very hopeful now. It's been a long, very, very long fight. You know, it comes at a cost. We lost good people along the way. You know, people I know, and that's. But I personally am very hopeful, and my message for hope right now is democracy can work. And we're making democracy work. The fact that the Prime Minister of Australia now is responding to us, even if he hasn't yet given us the answer that we need, he knows that we're going to hold him to account. So democracy is starting to work, and it's starting to work in our favour. And everyone can actually get on board now, and we can keep kicking some really big goals. Yeah, so that's my message.
So whether you're in Australia or Canada or the UK, write letters to your members of parliament. Tell them what you feel about this. The more the better. Inundate them with them. That's what we need.
Definitely. Go and talk to them. You know, go and if they don't write back, we'll go. You know, go and meet them in their writing office or their. Because I know you're there.
Yeah.
Email them. Give them a call. Hey, I'm still here. You know, you haven't replied to my letter. Go and talk to them.
I have to agree with you, though, that, you know, it's a much more hopeful situation now than it used to be. I mean, we go back far and, you know, never did I think we'd even be this far. I hoped, but I didn't think we would. But we have gained some supreme traction in the last few years for sure. So, Stuart, you got to come back on with us again. Just poof, time just flies when we have.
It does. It'd be my pleasure. I'd love to come back. You know, anytime.
You have lots to tell us yet, so we'll have to have you back again. And
we're about tafenoquine and some of this other stuff.
Oh yes, I haven't even started on that. And it's
that's
huge in itself, right? Like,
yes, but we really appreciate this, and you get to start your day, and we get to put ours away. So
yeah, I do. No, it's been my pleasure. It's been great talking to you, Marge, and you're trying to keep doing what you're doing, and we'll talk again.
And you keep doing what you're doing. I mean, we're all one day we'll get to the end of this thing.
We will.
Okay, thank you so much, Stuart, and enjoy your day. And we really appreciate you coming on. So take care, everyone.
Thank you.